In this video, you're going to learn what the reality is in the Finnish job market from the perspective of an international job seeker. In addition, you're going to learn about some of the biggest challenges that international talents face in Finland, and most importantly, how to prepare and tackle these challenges even before you ever apply for a job. What's up, guys, and welcome back to the channel. If this is the first time we're meeting, my name is Oliver, and I'm a master's student in economics at Aalto University in Finland. And on this channel, we talk about education and early career development, specifically here in Finland. So if you are new here, do consider subscribing. So in this video, I'm going to interview Steven der Horst, a highly experienced Dutch entrepreneur who has lived and worked in high-level managerial roles in 6 different countries. Nowadays, Steven lives in Finland, working as the Director of Recruitment and Staffing at Pointer Potential, which is the first diversity recruitment company in Finland. All right, thank you, Steven, so much for joining us today. I'm super grateful that you agreed to actually share some of your experience and expertise with the audience. Before we jump into the discussion, would you actually like to introduce yourself and your background briefly? And if you want to say a few words about Pointer Potential as well, that would be awesome.
Thank you, Oliver, for this opportunity to be in your series. I think you do a great job on highlighting the importance of the international students here in Finland, and also highlighting the opportunities they might have as well. But briefly, who am I? I'm a Dutch entrepreneur. I have lived in various countries around the world, but originally from Holland. I did my MBA studies in the US. After that, I moved to Singapore, where I started to work for Heineken. Lived there for 3-4 years. Heineken brought me to Holland, where I continued in marketing director globally. And then in 2000, I decided to become an entrepreneur around strategy and international marketing. That I did for about 12 years. Then I sold my company just before I moved to Finland, where I accompanied my wife. She had a nice opportunity to advance in her career. My wife is Finnish, and she works for a Finnish firm. And at that point of time, we lived in Belgium. And so we said, let's move to Finland. And to be honest, that's where the real adventure started, because when I moved to Finland, and I thought with my extensive international background in strategy and marketing, I was convinced that I could easily find a job here as well. And the reality it was slightly different. And an interesting part, though, is that when you start talking to a lot of firms, and you will always hear, like, wow, you're great, and this is exactly what we need, you are the perfect profile for us. And there are all kind of reasons why in the end they didn't hire me permanently. So then I thought, well, if that's the issue, then I decided to become again a consultant. What I am still today, I'm an independent consultant. I help out Finnish firms in the area of strategy and marketing, what I've done now for 6 years. And I work for large companies, smaller companies, but I also realized that how difficult actually it is as a foreigner to find a decent job in Finland. And then since I live here now for almost 7 years, I have a group of friends here living in Finland, and we discuss this quite often. And I realized that maybe, with my experience and my background, maybe I should move to the other side of the table. And then I heard about the opportunity that Pointer Potential started their operations in March this year. 1 week before Corona hit us. And that was a bit of a challenge at that point of time. But then I decided still to join them this summer after 6 months. And now actually there are the 2 of us, my colleague Joanna Korpia, she's the co-founder, and I joined them in August this year in order to build bridges between international graduates, professionals, and newcomers living in Finland and Finnish companies. And that the reason what we do is that we see this opportunity, this pool of talent that lives in Finland. And according to our estimates, out of the 420,000 foreigners that live in Finland today, we estimate that there are about 10%, so about 40,000 highly educated professionals living in Finland that are unemployed or underemployed. And we see this as a huge opportunity, because that's where we want to jump in and say, okay, what if we would help those people and connect them with those Finnish firms that have a talent shortage in certain industries or certain job areas, and then we will, connect the two, and that's our business model. And then along the same time, of course, besides the recruitment and staffing, we do the mentoring from the both sides, so we can mentor either the company to make sure that they fully understand what is it to create a diverse and inclusive work environment. And we mentor the candidate to make sure that if the candidate has a different background, that what are the things he needs to be aware of if he starts to work in a, let's say, mainly Finnish dominated environment. And then the last thing that we do is the what we call the retainment. And that's another thing that we see more and more, is that we have more dual careers. And when one of the partners has an opportunity to get a job in Finland, then the spouse usually also has a really good background and already a good career, but still having a hard time to enter the Finnish job market. So that's why we also focus on the spouses with a special spouse program. So that in a nutshell is who I am and what Point to Potential actually does.
Super interesting, and the numbers you mentioned sound just insane. The potential of being unemployed in Finland with a high degree or diploma it sounds completely insane, and this is such a huge problem or challenge that we really need to start addressing, not only as individuals but as a whole, and as companies and fields, as well as simply as a nation, because we do have national challenges coming up in the years ahead if we don't do it. But as mentioned, today we're going to be talking about the Finnish job market, and we will go through some tips and practical tricks on getting your career started in Finland as an international talent. But let's actually start with a more general outlook on the Finnish job market. So you were actually recently interviewed by the Finnish business paper Kauppalehti, in which you shared, in my mind, some tough but still really well-deserved criticism on some of the challenges that we have in Finland and in the Finnish job market, specifically regarding international talents. So if you could please start by discussing a bit about the way that the Finnish job market looks, specifically from the perspective of an international job seeker.
Yeah, that's a good point. And I think that you're right. I mean, if you look at the discussion that's going on in the media these days, and that's quite a bit of discussion actually. I mean, almost every day and definitely every week you will find articles about international talent shortage, about diversity and inclusion, about what Finnish firms should do, about how difficult it is to hire talents from abroad, because that whole process to bring them into the Finland is quite a tedious process that takes more than a year. So there's a lot of debate going on, but to bring it back to a more concrete level, because that's the issue that I don't like about this discussion, and that's why I was glad to have the opportunity to have that interview in Kauppalehti, was there's so much talking going on, but there's so little action taking place. And I think action sounds like a scary word almost, but there are so many different ways that both candidates, or let's say in this case, international graduates, and Finnish firms can do to make already the first steps into the right direction. And since this discussion is actually, I think, mostly appealing to the candidates and international graduates, and I like to start with that angle that, I mean, you hear a lot of stories that it's difficult to enter the Finnish market, and you have the language issues and whatever you have. And I always say that might be right, but look always from your own angle, your own perspective, where you are as a person and how you have developed your skills, your studies, your work experiences, and look at where you're coming from. And I'm sure that if you have done certain things, there will be opportunities that you can build further on. But having said that, Finland is in that sense slightly unique compared to other markets, because as I said, I've lived now in 6 countries, and 6 times I had to reinvent, how do I enter this market, and how do I get a job, how do I get a project, because I spent most of the time also as an entrepreneur and consultant. So you need to find an angle where your uniqueness, your skills are appreciated, and that can be anything. And that can be directly related to your studies, but it also can be that it's part of your personality. If you are really good at something as basic as let's say you are really good at social media like yourself, and you are developing and learning how to use YouTube as a channel, I mean, you can pursue even a career in that direction if you like to, regardless of your studies that you have done. But coming back to the uniqueness of Finland is that, yes, you're right that if you are an international job seeker in Finland, you will face a few hurdles along the way compared to, let's say, a Finnish job seeker. And one of them is the starting point. If you read a job ad and you reach out with your CV and cover letter, your last name will probably not be Finnish, and you might not even look Finnish if you add a picture in there. And if you look at the way you build up your CV, you probably mention universities and schools that no one knows in Finland, or you have worked for a company in another country that no one knows. There might be gaps in your CV because you moved from one country to another country. All these things that Finns most likely do not have. They have a perfect CV. They went to high school, they went to university or in the army first and then to university. They start with a Finnish company that everyone knows. They move to maybe another company. So it's a very logical, easy to read CV versus an international CV that is a bit scary because you don't know how to audit their experiences, their certificates, their diplomas, because you simply don't know these institutions, which of course is ridiculous because that's the mindset of the Finns because they are not used to it. If you go back in history a little bit, I came to Finland for the first time in 1991. And at that time, there were 60,000, actually 55,000 foreigners in Finland. And I remember that when I went to Tampere, I was almost like a movie star. And people came to me and they were happy to speak English to me, like, whoa, we have someone from Holland here. And I'm not exaggerating. That's how it was just like, 30 years ago.
Right.
And now today, we have about 7.5% of the population is foreign in Finland. And 7.5% it's not much, but if you look within, let's say, Ring 3 Helsinki area, that's 1 out of 4 because that's where the majority of the foreign people live. And if you realize that if 1 out of 4 already today in the Helsinki area is foreign, and in the next 30 years it will be 1 out of 3, then it's about time for companies to change their mindset when they start recruiting because they need to serve a different society. People around them that they need to serve on a daily basis, they will maybe not speak Finnish as well. So yes, if you read that CV and the cover letter and you see, that this person has a unique background, the companies should actually embrace that diversity and say, hey, this person with this background maybe is a better person to serve our clients in our society because they are changing as well. Well, that's only the first hurdle. So the second one, yes. If you are lucky and you go through, that first phase of sending your CV and cover letter, and this recruiter might say, wow, international potential, that's good. And you're invited for the job interview. There, the hurdle obviously is that you probably don't speak Finnish. You might not even speak English natively. So that means you are sitting in a room with a Finn, and you have your different cultural background. So the communication styles might not even match. So you might even get into some awkward moments. As we all know, the Finns love the silent moment. So if you're sitting in an interview meeting with an interviewer who can be very nice, quiet for 30 seconds or even a minute, it's not very comfortable. I can tell you from experience. So these are all things that will not really help you to smoothly run into the next phase of interviews and maybe even getting the job. But let's say you do a great job in that interview round and you get through the second hurdle of interviews. The third hurdle then is if you are foreign talent, it's most likely 2 things will happen to you. And the first thing is that they might offer you a job on a temporary basis. So not on a permanent basis, because that might be too risky. So they offer you a job for 6 or 12 months. So it's a fixed term employment. So that actually gives the employer the opportunity to get to know you and see whether you are good and whether there's a match, and they will then eventually hire you permanently. The second thing that you might face is that from experience and from what we see in the market is they offer you a position that might be even slightly below your potential. So that's another interesting thing because again, they are risk averse. They don't want to go really, taking all their risks. So these are hurdles that are rather painful for that person that thinks, hey, with my background, with my skills, with my diplomas, I'm a great communicator. And now I need to accept a position that is below what I'm actually used to and only for 6 or 12 months. But okay, let's say you're going through that hurdle as well and things go well. Then the fourth one is that what we see happening, at least until today, that might change in the near future, is that the international talent will not progress in his career as fast as a Finn. So if you add up all these four hurdles, you might say, what the heck am I doing? And I don't want to bring it as a negative thing. It's just that you need to be aware of these hurdles. But if you are aware of them, you can actually prepare yourself better. You know what to do. You know how to negotiate. But you need to know that this is reality, what I'm talking about. This is not like a fantasy story. So, and if you now know this, then you need to look at yourself and say, okay, how can I use this knowledge to my advantage? So if I'm an international graduate and I will graduate next summer, so how are you going to deal with this? So how do I build up my CV and cover letter to increase my chances, to get at least to the interview rounds? Well, that's I think, at least what I could share with you at this point to help, the listeners to prepare well.
Right. I think you touched on so important points. And again, as you mentioned, we don't want to alarm anyone and we don't want to be too negative about this. But again, because this is the reality, at least currently, it is good to acknowledge that it is. And only after understanding how the situation might be in your case, you're able to address it and prepare for it already beforehand, not only during your studies here in Finland, but also even perhaps before you move here, depending, of course, on your situation. But because, of course, we have these challenges, we have to have some solutions to them. But actually, before we jump into the practical tips and recommendations on how to perhaps approach these challenges, I want to touch really quickly on one topic that came up in your interview in Kauppalehti, and that was the startup culture in Finland. And as a super short background to those who don't know yet, I've spoken about this topic a bit before on the channel, is that during the last 10 years or so, there has been a huge trend and big boom in the Finnish startup culture, especially here in the Helsinki capital region. And a lot of this startup culture and a big part of the boom actually came from Finnish universities. And one of the big parts was actually Aalto University and the startup ecosystem that they had, which was started by students. And I actually had this very interesting discussion with a friend of mine just 2 days ago. We discussed the same topic, and he mentioned that he sees it very interesting because the same discussion that we are currently having now on a national level or in the corporate level, we actually had this exact same discussion 5 years ago in different student communities. And we had to go through the same hurdles. And many of the student communities, groups, associations, different organizations, and especially pushed by this startup culture, we actually were able to progress through these challenges, and actually they are not that big of a problem anymore in that part of the I would say Finnish nation or Finnish culture. But how do you see the startup culture and the I would say the overall startup field, if I could say put it this way, in Finland? Do we have the same problems there as well, or is it a bit different?
Well, I'm glad you mentioned the startup scene and the growth scene because we all know that because of Slush, this whole startup scene has exploded in Finland. which means that they almost on a daily basis, new ones are popping up like mushrooms.
And so a super quick summary, Slush is basically the world's leading startup event, which is held annually in November in Helsinki. Of course, this year being an exception, but please go on.
Correct. And it started by Finnish students as well. And I think they did an amazing job in creating the world's leading event for startups. But before I go into the startups, yesterday I read an extremely interesting article regarding the startups that opened also my eyes, is that today, and we're talking about November 2020, that the money that flows into the startup scene through VCs and PEs, that means venture capitalist companies and private equity companies, is the highest ever, meaning that the money today is not the issue anymore. There's more than enough money, and because of Slush, money, I'm not just talking about money that comes from Finnish VCs and PEs, but globally is flowing into Finland/Nordics, but Finland is the leading one here because of Slush. And what is interesting now is that the biggest problem they face, like anyone else in the world, is getting money in. The biggest challenge they have here is getting the right talent in. So that means that the startup scene is booming, but not as much as it could do because there's a lack of talent, or that they call talent shortage, in the startup scene. And then you might say, whoa, this is great. Then, I'm going to start talking to a startup and I will apply for a job there. And well, that's the downside of the story. A startup, like it says is in a nutshell, a group of, I call it almost friends, that have a same purpose, a same goal, a same vision, that start to build something, because most of the startups are in the online scene. So it's all online kind of business, or building platforms or ecosystems. So we hardly see a startup that says, well, let's start to build something physical. So they start to physically engineer something or produce something. So it's all online. So that means that, yes, you can scale very quickly, but we also know that before you start making money, it takes a bit of time. And startups tend to be very reluctant in hiring people because that is fixed cost they cannot cover. So there are a lot of interesting organizations that bring in graduates into the startup scene. And I actually had an interview last week with a graduate, an international graduate, who started a job through one of those companies. But then what I hear, the story, and again, linking back what I said earlier about the 4 hurdles that they will face in Finland, and that also applies to the startup scene, is that, yes, they were hired, but they were hired for 6 months. They got extremely little pay to nothing. So they had to prove themselves. And the only excuse they got from the startup is, yes, but it will look on your CV. So here I raise the flag and say, be cautious here, because you have startups and you have startups. And again, you need to look from your own skill and experience and what you really like to do in order to be successful. And if you say, regardless of your background, well, I'm so desperate, I need the job, so I will apply for a startup that is not even close to your interest or passion, it will not work. So, you know what I'm saying? It's like, yes, the startup scene is booming. There is a shortage of talent. But if you are in the field of a designer, developer, architect, engineer, for sure, or data analyst, data scientist, you will find a job tomorrow. I'm not worried about that group of people. But the majority of the international graduates might not have such a background. So then you can either say, but I really feel passion for that. So follow a course or whatever you do in order to get into that knowledge field, or think about, again, your own strength and say, hey, but I am a really passionate business developer. I know how to connect people. I know how to do marketing. I know how to, what this little startup has, most of the startups don't have commercial people. These are all brains, because brains come together, they build something, and then they come to the conclusion, whoa, now we need to sell this. So, you need to find your uniqueness, your skill, that you say, hey, this is something I can add to such a small company, because recruitment is all about value add. What can you bring to a company? And there are only a few categories that you need to think of. If you talk to a company, to a startup or to a Finnish firm, and you want to apply for a job, They only recruit because, one, you make more money for them. Two, you save more money for them. And three, you save them a lot of time. These are the core principles of recruitment. And always keep that in mind, because if you just think that the world is waiting for you because you are a brilliant guy with a brilliant A-list from the university, that's not going to do the job anymore.
That's such a super important point, and I think your points about the startup ecosystem and scene are excellent, and one should definitely keep this in mind. Even doesn't matter how lucrative some positions might look, you have to keep in mind that there are always upsides and downsides, and you really have to think through what are your own aspirations, your goals. What is your capability and ability, for example, financially as a student, perhaps, to partake in these types of projects, and whether or not it's something that you are able to do long term, depending on, of course, on the situation. But I think that your last point is a great segue to our part about actually facing these challenges. So, question: what do recruiters in Finland expect from job seekers? Especially with your background in multiple countries, do you see any differences, cultural differences, between Finnish recruiters or Finnish recruitment processes versus perhaps some other countries in Europe?
And I don't want to sound like the guru that I know everything, or that I don't want to generalize either. But what
Sure.
I can bring from own experience is that the Finnish recruiter is rather, I would say, formal, meaning that you need to be also professional when you approach them. And I see almost on a daily basis CVs and cover letters coming in from younger people, fresh graduates, whereby they use a language and jargon and smileys and informal ways of expressing their emotions and their interests that I think will not work for them. Keep in mind that you're talking to very professional people that have a big responsibility in such a company. They need to make sure that that person that they are going to recruit, whether it's a Finn or international, has first of all the right skills and experiences, which means you need to have a certain amount of professionalism in order to be taken seriously. And then also what is important is that you need to fit in that culture. And of course, if you are applying for a job in a very hip, trendy design agency, and if you look at their website, it's full of bright colors and funny pictures, yes, you might be maybe a bit more informal. But the average Finnish firm is rather serious and professional. So always then think how you need to communicate that fits with that company culture and communication without moving too far away from who you are, because there's no point to keep up appearances and try to be a certain person so that you think you might fit in that company. And if that is already an exercise that you have difficulties with, you really have to consider, is that the right company to apply for?
That's a really good point. That actually brings up something that some people I've been asked quite a lot, and that is, how do you, for example, dress up for a job interview? And I think that we can take from what you said is that depending on the company, so dress appropriately, speak and communicate appropriately depending on the company that you're applying to. If you're, for example, if your aspiration is to become a financial banker, that is a completely different scene from, for example, let's say a really quickly growing software development company that is doing the Uber for something, for Uber for groceries, for example. So always think about the context. And as you mentioned, a really good place to start is, for example, the company website. You get a lot of, you can actually, by reading and looking at the branding and the way that, for example, people communicate on their social media, on the company's social media, you can actually feel how the company, what kind of culture the company has, and then you can from there you can actually um, you should try to analyze on how your behavior, what kind of a person would fit into that company. Again, keeping in mind that there's no point of keeping up appearances. So if a company is not suitable for you culturally, perhaps it's not the place to go. Right. So you mentioned a couple of things that one should avoid while applying for a job in Finland. Um, but do you have any other tips on, for example, common mistakes that people do when applying for work in Finland as international job seekers?
Yeah, good question. I mean, as I said, you shouldn't be too informal. Always see what matches with the company. Don't be too aggressive or desperate either, because that's what you also see now is that if you have applied for a job for a couple of months or maybe even a year, you have to sometimes rethink how you write your cover letter and CV because it might be too aggressive or depressing. And what I would advise to do is audit it by a friend or a family member, so who has a totally fresh and objective view on that, so that you can actually be corrected, because you will get into this negative spiral, that you will eventually start to become a bit cranky on why don't I get a job. So be careful with that as well. Always highlight the positive side, look for the challenge and the opportunities instead of, that you only talk from your own perspective. And this is the point, I think the most important point that people need to take, I think, with them when they think about reaching out to a company. It's what I always call, it's moving yourself inside out view to an outside in view. And 9 out of 10 times, I will see a CV and a cover letter that is highly pushing the person, how great he is, how brilliant he is, what he has done, what he has achieved. The point here is that there is no recruiter that is interested in how great you are. The recruiter is only interested if you can think outside in. So that means that you understand the pain points and the challenges the company you're recruiting to, that you understand that you rephrase that, and that you are actually then telling them with your experiences how you believe you can add value to their issues. That is an angle. That is the most important takeout, hopefully, for this session, because that is what most students or job seekers do wrongly. So, and that is something that you always need to consider, because people tend to talk very, very quickly about, because they want to sell themselves, because they think the more I tell about myself, the better it is. And it's actually the other way around. Tell only the most critical parts that are relevant for that particular position that you are applying for, but give it a context for the company so that the company and the recruiter understand that you have done your study, that you know where the company is at, and where you know where the company is going to and where you might fit in.
That is, again, such an important point, and we actually spoke about this with Saku Tihveräinen in the first interview in the series, and he mentioned that this doesn't apply only to international talents. This applies to every single job seeker on the planet, especially in the beginning when you don't really perhaps understand the job hunting process that deeply. Is that many people think that a CV and especially a cover letter is supposed to be a text filled with specific keywords that trigger an algorithm or some kind of a bot somewhere. And this prompts, excuse me, this prompts a lot of job seekers to build a singular cover letter filled with these specific keywords about themselves again, and then they copy paste this without any kind of edits or changes to multiple different companies. And this is where you go wrong every single time, especially because, number one, because you don't think about the job or the position again from the perspective of the company, as you mentioned. But secondly, because if you don't address the issues that the company has mentioned, for example, in their job ad, because you have this general overview of yourself, why should that company be interested not only in you because you have not told them in any way what you can do to them. But also, as we spoke with Saku, recruiters are extremely busy people. They do a lot of work, long hours, and they don't have that much time per applicant to go through and actually try to analyze what that person is meaning that if you don't already in your cover letter CV tell them what value added will you bring to the company, they will not have the time to actually have a long discussion with you and try to dig that out. So you have to be very proactive in telling the company why are you the right person to solve their problems. And then you have to go back to the 3 points that you made about money, time.
No, but I think that is the head, that is right on the nail, the head of the nail. That what you're saying, and again, because if you really, I mean, if you are studying now in Finland and you know you will graduate next summer, for instance, I think we all know that applying for a job will take 3 to 6 months easily, which means you already need to start applying for a job today if you want to get a job in August next year. And before you can start applying for a job, first of all, of course, you need to do your research. You need to know where you want to work. It doesn't work that you go over the list of open positions and you think like, hey, that's an interesting position. I'm going to apply for that position. I would challenge anyone to first think, where do you see yourself in 1, 2, 3 years from now? In what kind of industry? Then bring that industry down to a short list of 10 companies. Then you visit the website of those 10 companies and see whether they have any openings. And I bet you most companies will always have, open applications, so you can always send your CV. You might say, yeah, but that doesn't really work because nobody's waiting for that. And I disagree with that, because you start from your passion and your interest, and you don't pursue a job that it would be nice to have and I at least might have an income, because you will not survive in that job. So think about it. Where are you 3 years from now? What industry, what kind of companies? And then you target those companies. And then when you target those companies, I'm not just saying visit their website. That really includes a lot more. You go on their LinkedIn, you see for the key people that are working at a company, you go to the annual report, you go to all the events online, you visit the webinars, you check out the annual general shareholders meeting, you name it, you check out the sustainability report. You need to understand what this company is doing. Otherwise, what's the point of recruiting? And then while you do your study, which will take at least another month, is that you highlight for yourself all the key findings and insights that you found, and those you will use in your cover letter and relate that to your experience and skills, so that you build that bridge, so that when the recruiter reads that, he has two things. Like I said earlier, first of all, you have sincere interest in that company because you have done your research. And don't go for the open doors that everyone knows that this company is profitable or that he's doing, but you need to look for, in your particular interest of position, whether it's finance or marketing or logistics or you name it, you find their key challenges. And then you mention those, and then you might say, even if you have zero work experience, at least you can say, hey, look, I have studied that topic for the last 3 years, and I will be very keen to develop myself further in this area. And I still think I can add value to your organization because of A, B, C. And then you put yourself in your shoes and say, hey, I would love to start as a trainee, or I would love to start as a whatever level, but put yourself in a humble position instead of like, hey, I have now this wonderful diploma, and I think, I can actually help you out to your team because you're a graduate. You need to start at the bottom of the ladder. Everyone has to start at the bottom. You can't just jump in halfway, even though mentally you might think I know everything, but in reality, you still have to learn a lot.
That's again a really good point, and you actually jumped to the next topic that I want to talk about, and which is how to prepare for the upcoming job hunting season. So to give a rough estimate, at least from the terms of a student, this will change a bit after you graduate because you are open to look for jobs at any time of year. But In my personal experience, I would love to get your point on this as well. But in my experience, the biggest job hunting seasons, specifically for students, are in early autumn, and then during the entire spring season. So starting basically from January all the way until I would even say July, depending on the company. Uh, if you agree or disagree, please give me a pointer. But then, of course, the question is, how do you prepare? And as you mentioned, you have to take a long time to prepare for job seeking. What do you need to do in addition to the points that you mentioned?
Well, recap quickly, because I think the two issues they overlap. So make your homework. Think where you want to work in what industries. You start following what's happening in those industries or companies that you are interested in. There is no perfect time to recruit, if you ask me, except of course Christmas time. It's not going to happen, and most likely in the summertime, mid-July, mid-August, it's not going to happen either, because everyone is on a holiday, or at least, even though they want to hire you in that period, but they need to wait for a superior to approve it. So those 2 months, mid-December, mid-January, mid-July, mid-August, to me, is not the best time of the year, which leaves 10 other months that I think are equally important for anyone that looks for a position, because you can argue on, again, what industry and what position you apply for. From experience, I know that the beginning of the year, first quarter, is very important if you are looking, because that means the budgets are coming available for the new year, so people can just start recruit people for the Q1. Q2 is great for the internships, because most of the companies actually start their internships or management trainee programs in Q2. So that if you are interested in that, keep an eye on that one. That tells me that if you are interested in management trainee programs or internships, that you already need to look in this quarter, because they usually do this 4 to 6 months before those internships start. So that everything that you want to do, you need to have a 6-month lead time, because it's not like, hey, now I'm interested in a job, I graduate next month, I will start to apply for a job and hope to get a job in 2 months. It's not going to work like that. It's not going to work like that. So I said, if you take a lead time of 6 to 9 months, I think that would be very fair. So that means you do your research really thoroughly for 1-2 months. Then you start to look around for another 2-3 months. Then you get into the interview rounds for 2-3 months. And then if you're lucky, you can start within 1-2 months. So it adds up easily to 9 months altogether. And it sounds depressing, but that's reality. And you mentioned, for instance, culture-wise, Finland is a country that goes by the rule. It's a rather formal society and very professional. So like in the US, I lived in the US as well, I got hired in a month because the economy and the culture is totally different. If they see an opportunity in you, you walk by, they say, hey, we want you. Please join our company. It's a different culture. And again, I don't want to put it in a general context. And that's a topic I want to touch on quickly, is that yes, you can speed up that process if you spend considerable amount of time in networking.
Very good point.
And that is a big misconception, because people think that networking is going to events and having a lot of LinkedIn friends and all that. But with networking, I mean you connect with people that you think are relevant for your next step in your career. And that can be people from the same industry, that can be people from another industry. It can be indirect networking, that if you have a good person you are close to and he can bring you into contact with another person, but never force that. Finns don't like to be forced in networking. It needs to come from a natural way. So that means that if you have a person that you know he has a friend that you would like to work for, you're not going to ask directly, hey, can you bring me in contact with? That by what you tell your friend, how passionate you are, and you really hope you can actually pursue a career in that kind of company, that he will say, hey, I have actually a person in that industry, I might get you in contact. You know what I'm saying? You need to do it in a smart way. And again, most people use networking in a forced way, so that they think, oh, as long as I'm clear and loud and direct to people, they might bring me in contact with It's the other way around in Finland. You need to do everything in an indirect and again, humble way. Don't push too hard, but make indirectly clear where your aspirations are. And then people will, if they really think you are suitable for that, they will bring you into the contact with the right person. And if that happens, and I've seen it happening, then the Finns are the best friends to have because they will really do a proper introduction for you at the company you want to work for.
That's actually really funny that you brought this up. And again, this is such an important topic. And I think you had really good points about what networking actually is. But this personal experience, or funny that you mentioned this, yesterday, actually, I was spending the evening with an old colleague of mine from my previous company. And as it happened, another friend of mine from school that I've known almost 8 years called me 2 days prior, letting me know that they actually have an opening, that I might be suitable for that job, but because of my current entrepreneurial aspirations, I would not be suitable for that position. However, yesterday, with this old colleague of mine who I know personally really well, I of course know him on a professional level, and I know his abilities in this specific field. He happened to mention out loud that I might be looking for something new currently in this and this field. Wasn't asking for it, wasn't pushing himself, but I made that connection immediately in my mind. This person who I know really well, and I trust him that company is an excellent company, and I know that it would be a great company to work with, great colleagues. And this second old colleague of mine who is excellent fit for that position. Actually, this interview, I have scheduled a call to call this HR manager in that other company to actually recommend this old colleague of mine. And again, nothing was forced, but rather it was, this might sound a bit harsh, but it has been years of getting to know these people on personal and professional level. So this doesn't mean that I'm just giving out favors, but it's purely based on personal and professional trust, as well as integrity, because this happened totally naturally, not forced at all. So I think this is a very good example.
Yeah, no, I'm glad you have, because I have loads of those examples as well from myself, but also from my network. Is that this is the way it works in Finland. In Holland, to be honest, it would be more direct. That's why I also had to make that mind shift when I moved to Finland. That because in the beginning I was also too harsh, too direct, and too confronting. And I learned that this is not going to help me, to get into the next consulting project.
Right.
And then I started to network in a different way, and I just told people in my network that this is what I do. This is how I help, or I like to help companies, without mentioning names or specific industries. And then people start to contact you through email or telephone or whatever, and then things start to move. And that's an interesting learning point as well, where I mean, you need to be aware of this kind of, I would say, cultural differences in how to network. And again, there are definitely graduates from a culture where most likely, like the US, Germany, Holland, it's a bit different, in how you do that. And here it is again, be humble, be yourself, but indirect. Don't go straight to your goal. But of course, I would definitely encourage everyone that knows exactly what they want to definitely follow those companies, attend their online events and webinars and whatever they have, so that you really get to know people from that company. Because sometimes the company might look fantastic from the outside, but the moment you start to follow the company and you see actually, videos or online events, and you see management or certain people in that company talking and behaving, you might have something like, maybe this is not my kind of work culture, I would thrive in. So, I mean, this is, again, I would definitely use those opportunities because, again, most of the time, what you think as an outsider, how great a certain company is, most of the time, the company in reality is slightly different. And the more you can find out before you really apply for that position in that company, the better it is. And there are always ways to figure out how that works, or get in contact with people that work for the company and hear their stories about the culture and how it is to work in an environment like that.
Mm, very true. And maybe the one more thing that I would like to touch upon a bit, specifically in regards to networking, if we consider students who are about to arrive to Finland or are currently doing their studies, let's forget the COVID situation completely, because this has changed quite a bit how we network in general. Do you have any practical tips on how to start networking as a student? Any type of tricks or tips that you could share?
That's actually a good point, because international students, depending whether they come to Finland for a one-year program or they come here for a three-year program, but if it's a one-year program, that means that they pretty much need to start networking from day one if they have the intention to stay here after their studies. And we all know, if you come from another part of the world and you move into Finland, it will take you a few months to get adjusted to everything. You need to settle in and all that. But they sometimes then forget that they also need to network in order to increase their chances of getting a job after their studies. And maybe even when they move to Finland for studies, they don't even have the intention to stay here. But then throughout the year, they find their love, or they fall in love with Finland as a country, or so sometimes it happens at a later stage during that year. But the ones that come to Finland and they have a clear view, like, hey, this is a country where I would like to work, is you need to start networking from a very early day when you start your studies. Because the more time you spend on networking, the better it is. Because as I always say, you can't network enough. But then coming back to you, like what they can do is actually, to be honest, I don't see a big difference whether you are a student or a young professional. I mean, it's all about how structurized and how well you prepare yourself, again, in where do you see yourself in 3 to 5 years from now. And the younger you are, probably the more difficult it is to see yourself in a certain position in 5 years from now, because you don't know. You pick the studies and you do your studies, and then after your studies, you think the whole world is open to you, which is true, and it's not true, because you already picked the studies that pushed you in a certain direction. So, and then if you know, based on your experience and the studies, where you want to go, that helps, of course, if you have a clearer view where you want to go. And I keep mentioning that because I'm always surprised at how many people have no clue what they want. Whether you're a student, a young professional, even a professional with 10 or 15 years experience, they are still lost. They say, well, actually, I can do this or I can do that. Doesn't help you in finding the perfect job that fits you. And that's why you need to spend some time first to understand where you want to go. And then you start to network, as I said, online, offline. Well, now it's Corona and offline networking is tough. It's actually impossible. But this I think, will get better in the coming months. But the moment you have the opportunity, I mean, try to get into events that these kind of companies organize, whether it's a marketing event or it is a recruitment event. Try to get in touch with people from that company you would love to work for as much as you can. And again, what is always the best thing to do, and I know it's a bit of a scary thing to do, is, it really sounds silly, but this is the best thing that works in practice: call. I know for the young generation, it's a tough thing to do. They love to WhatsApp and to be online. But the thing you have in your hand, it's also called a telephone. It's not just an online device to do your social media. Call the company, explain who you are, that you have interest in the company and who would be the best person to talk to. And I bet you that most company will say, oh, well, maybe you should talk to this person or to that person. So that's the best thing to do. Call that company and say, hey, this is who I am. This is what I study. I come from that country, and I would love to get to know this company better. Who would have 10 minutes time to talk to? Call and talk.
That is an excellent tip. And I think this is a really good point to end, unless you have some additional points that you didn't get the chance to speak of, or if you have any other additional tips that you would like to share.
Well, I enjoyed this discussion a lot because it's, as you can see, it's passionate and it's close to my heart. And I think that I know it's not always easy, you know, when you graduate or you are a young professional to find the job that is really close to what you want. But I think that is normal. For those people that think, well, I would need a bit of support. I mean, they can, you know, contact me if they want to, and we provide actually consulting services for those who are really interested in professionalizing the way they want to reach out to companies. And otherwise, another thing I would like to do, sorry for the brief commercial break.
Please.
Graduates that are looking seriously for a job, then I would at least recommend them to upload their CV on our website, which is then www.pointofpotential.fi. And I would definitely do that. So because we are a startup, we are a human recruitment agency. Actually, we are the only cultural diversity recruitment agency in Finland right now. We only focus on international graduates, professionals, and newcomers living in Finland. And what we do is we don't use AI and all this trendy tech stuff that detect, as you said, you know, the keywords, and then we link you with another company. We read CVs, we read cover letters, so that we know who's in our database, so that we have an opportunity, that we have somehow an idea who you are. So that's why it's important that your cover letter and CV are two complementary documents. They are not overlapping, so you're not explaining your CV or your cover letter what you said in your CV. So really think about that how you can give a 360 view on you, who you are and what you want. And if you do that in a proper way, of course, we have a better idea of who you are and what you want, and then we can help you better.
Excellent. And I will have the links to the website. And for example, could I have the link to your LinkedIn profile if people want to connect there?
Yeah, sure. My LinkedIn profile or email address, it's no problem.
Excellent. I will have all the contact information for you in the description box below if anyone is interested in getting in touch with you after seeing this interview. Stephen, thank you so much for all the super interesting insight. I really hope that people find a real value out of this discussion. Again, as I mentioned with Saku, these tips are not just relevant now, but these are very general tips and ideas that you can utilize in 2020, 2021, and years to come. And I definitely hope that this helps a lot of people actually get go the next step and actually get employed and start a really great career here in Finland.
And don't forget, you are needed in Finland. Just find the right angle and you will find that opportunity.
That is very true. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Stephen, for sharing all of these valuable insights. If you want to connect with Stephen or me, I have links to both of our LinkedIn accounts and emails in the description box below. Next, I recommend that you watch this video or go through this playlist for more valuable interviews on job hunting in Finland. Thanks again for watching, guys, and I will see you in the next one. Bye-bye.